Imagine walking through a city at night, and the streets are lit. Not by torches held by servants, not by fire pits on corners, but by organized, oil-fed lamps lining wide, clean, deliberately planned streets. Now imagine this isn't London. It isn't Paris. It isn't Rome. This is Benin City, in what is today southern Nigeria. And the year is somewhere in the 1400s to 1500s. While much of Europe was still navigating unpaved, dark, disease-ridden streets, an empire in West Africa had already solved problems that European cities wouldn't crack for another 200 years. This is not myth. This is not legend. This is documented history, recorded by European explorers themselves. Welcome to Enchanted Story Network. Today, we're telling the story of one of the most advanced cities in the medieval and early modern world. A city that history buried. A city it's time you knew about. This is the story of the Benin Empire. To truly understand how remarkable Benin City was, we need to put it in context. Let's travel back to the 1400s. In Europe, cities like London and Paris are growing, but they are also filthy. Streets are unpaved. Sewage runs openly. Plague is a recurring nightmare. After dark, cities go almost completely black. There is no organized lighting, no urban planning as we would recognize it today. Wealthy merchants might hang a lantern outside their door. But the streets themselves? Dark, dangerous, unplanned. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, in the forests of West Africa, something extraordinary is being built. The Kingdom of Benin, ruled by the Oba, the divine king, is entering one of its greatest periods of expansion, artistry, and urban sophistication. And at its heart sits Benin City, a place that will leave European visitors utterly speechless. When European explorers and traders began arriving on the West African coast in the late 1400s and 1500s, they expected to find something lesser. What they found shook their assumptions to the core. Dutch writer Alfred Dapper, drawing on accounts from traders and explorers, described Benin City in striking terms, calling it comparable to Amsterdam and the great cities of Holland. He noted its wide, straight avenues, its organized layout, its scale. Multiple European accounts describe a city of impressive size and order. The streets were wide enough for several horsemen to ride side by side. They stretched in long, deliberate lines, suggesting not organic growth, but intentional urban planning. And then there were the walls. The walls of the Benin Kingdom were not just around the city. They formed an enormous network of earthworks, ditches, and ramparts, stretching across the entire kingdom. Researchers have estimated that this network of walls and moats was over 16,000 kilometers in total length. To put that in perspective, that is 4 times the length of the Great Wall of China. These weren't walls built in desperation. They were built over centuries by a civilization that understood engineering, territory, and the long game of empire building. Now let's talk about the detail that stops people in their tracks every single time. Street lighting. Accounts from visitors to Benin City describe large metal lamps. Some sources describe them as being mounted on tall poles that burned palm oil and lit the streets at night. This was not accidental. This was not decorative. This was infrastructure. The city had a system for keeping streets lit after dark, organized, maintained, and functional. Now here's the comparison that puts this in perspective. London, the capital of what would become one of the most powerful empires in history, did not introduce organized public street lighting until 1736, when the City of London began systematically installing oil lamps on its streets. Benin City had a version of this over 200 years earlier. Paris introduced systematic street lighting in 1667, still over a century after Benin City's documented illuminated streets. Let that sink in. When European explorers arrived in Benin City and marveled at what they saw, they weren't looking at something behind Europe. They were looking at something ahead of it. But street lighting was just one piece of what made Benin City remarkable. The Benin Empire was a sophisticated state with a royal court, an administrative bureaucracy, a standing military, and a thriving economy built on trade. And then there was the art. The Benin bronzes, a collection of brass plaques, sculptures, and ivory carvings, represent some of the finest metalwork ever produced in human history. Created by Royal Guild artisans over several centuries, these pieces documented the history of the kingdom, celebrated its rulers, and showcased a level of technical mastery that European experts, upon first seeing them, initially refused to believe could have come from Africa. Some even fabricated theories that they must have been made by lost European or Middle Eastern craftsmen. They were wrong. The bronzes were made by Benin artists, using a sophisticated lost wax casting technique that had been developed and refined in the kingdom over generations. The Oba, the king of Benin, ruled over a complex court with ministers, guild leaders, chiefs, and a structured hierarchy. Laws were enforced. Trade was regulated. The city functioned. This was not a village. This was not a chiefdom. This was a state as real, as complex, and as powerful as any in the world at that time. So what happened? If Benin City was this advanced, this powerful, why don't we talk about it the same way we talk about Rome or Athens? The answer is painful, and it is deliberate. In 1897, the British Empire launched what they called a punitive expedition against Benin. Following a diplomatic breakdown and the killing of British officers, British forces marched on Benin City. They burned it. The royal palace, centuries of history, set on fire. The Oba was captured and exiled. And the Benin bronzes, thousands of them, were looted, taken back to Britain, sold to museums across Europe and America to pay for the cost of the expedition. Today, those bronzes sit in the British Museum, the Ethnologists Museum in Berlin, and dozens of other institutions around the world, while Nigeria continues to fight for their return. The destruction of Benin City was not just physical. It was a deliberate attempt to erase proof of African sophistication. Because if people knew what Benin had achieved, the story of African primitiveness that colonialism depended on simply could not hold. But here's what they couldn't destroy. They couldn't destroy the memory. They couldn't destroy the descendants. And they couldn't destroy the record because European explorers had already written it down. Benin City still exists today in Edo State, Nigeria. The Oba of Benin still holds his throne, one of the oldest continuous monarchies in the world. And a growing global movement is demanding the return of the Benin bronzes to their rightful home. In recent years, some institutions have begun returning pieces. Germany has led some repatriation efforts. The conversation is happening loudly and with growing force. But perhaps the most important legacy of the Benin Empire is what it tells us about who we are and what we're capable of. African civilization did not begin with colonization. African cities did not begin with European contact. African engineering, art, governance, and ingenuity have deep, ancient, magnificent roots, and Benin City is one of the brightest examples of that truth. The streets of Benin were lit, literally and figuratively, long before the world was ready to acknowledge it. History is not just what happened. History is what we choose to remember and what we choose to tell. At Enchanted Story Network, we believe every civilization deserves its story told fully, honestly, and with the respect it has always deserved. The Benin Empire built walls that stretched for 16,000 kilometers. They cast bronzes that rivaled the finest art in human history. They governed a complex state for centuries. And yes, they lit their streets while London walked in darkness. That story deserves to be told. And now you know it. If this moved you, share it. Someone in your life needs to hear this. Subscribe to Enchanted Story Network for more untold stories from across human history. And drop a comment below. What civilization should we cover next? Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and never stop seeking the truth.